The book I decided to compare with Homonymous award-winning film is Girl Interrupted, written by Susanna Kaysen in a diary form. The writer tells the story of her stay in Claymore Psychiatric Hospital, during which she began writing this autobiography, driven by her passion for writing. The film stars Winona Ryder as Susanna and Angelina Jolie as Lisa. Susanna Kaysen was born in the United States and, at the time of her admission in the hospital, she was only 18. She had just graduated from the Cambridge School of Weston. The other story is quite tragic. She ends up in the hospital following an attempted suicide, which is described in detail in the book. Susanna swallows 50 aspirins. However, doctors manage to save her life in time. She is sent for an interview with a psychiatrist who diagnoses an acute form of depression, so he decides to hospitalize her. In the hospital, she begins therapy with various psychologists and psychiatrists, and they diagnose her with a borderline personality disorder, so she's locked up for the following 2 years in the facility. Many topics are discussed, such as suicide, psychiatric diseases, the relationships with the other patients, with doctors and nurses, assigned care, applied protocols, psychiatric sessions. As it often happens, movies which are inspired by books, especially if they are based on true stories, differ in some aspects. First of all, the type of storytelling. In both cases, the narration is set in the first person by Susanna. In the book, as a stream of consciousness, while in the film, the protagonist's observations and thoughts are organized and less confusing in function of explaining the events shown. Chronological order is different as well. The film starts with the end of the story. In fact, Liz and Susanna are presented in a sort of nostalgic flashback, immediately followed by the scene in which Susanna is rushed to the hospital after attempting suicide. On the other hand, in the book, the incipit is based on a question she was frequently asked. That is, how did you get in there? Even if, in the author's opinion, what people really wanted to know was if they were likely to end up in there as well because considered insane. Among the substantial differences, there is the presentation of the co-protagonist Lisa. Excluding her appearance in the film's opening scene, Lisa is presented through a twist. She had been brought back to the hospital following one of her multiple escapes, whereas in the book she is simply introduced in the first chapter when she participates in a conversation between the patients. Another difference is in the presentation of Valerie's physicality, the head nurse. In the film, she is presented as a sturdy African-American, while in the book she is described as a 30-year-old woman who looked like Lisa, tall, skinny, and with tapered arms and legs. Another important difference is that of Daisy's suicide circumstances. In the book, the author explains that, after her release from the hospital and their relocation into her new apartment, she is found dead because she committed suicide, and it is not explained how she did it, and the information transpires in the hospital through a communication from the nurses to the patients. Whereas in the film, that is one of the most shocking scenes, during which even Lisa and Susanna are present, because the night before they escaped from the hospital and took refuge in Daisy's house. Furthermore, in this scene, it is implied that Lisa's heavy criticism about Daisy, which occurred the previous night during an argument, is partly to blame for her suicide. There is also a big difference in regard to the final part. In the film scene, Lisa bullies Susanna by reading her diary, which contains all her thoughts, to all her now friends and companions, because Lisa is jealous that Susanna is declared healed and she is ready to be dismissed. The main characters fight heavily, and for the first time, Susanna rebels against Lisa and succeeds in silencing her. When Susanna's resignation day comes, the protagonists say goodbye to all her patients and the nurses of the hospital. And when the time comes to say goodbye to Lisa, she finds her semi-unconscious with a blank gaze, post-electroshock, and tied to the bed. Susanna decides to put nail polish on her as a sign of peace and friendship. On the other hand, in the book's final chapters, the author talks about their diagnosis, explaining what the borderline disorder is, and the book ends with a meeting with her former roommate, Georgina, who visits her in her new home where she moved after being discharged. The neighbor of the upper floor is also described, a character who is not mentioned in the film because unnecessary for the narrative. In the comparison between the book and the movie, we can find also some interesting analogies. For instance, several iconic phrases pronounced by the different characters, which in the film are reported exactly as they are told in the book, such as the writing of the billboard in front of Daisy's house: "If you lived here, you'd be home by now." Or the classic answer of one of the nurses who used to answer, "We agreed to disagree," during the frequent fights with the patients. This analysis between the book and the movie gave me the chance to see Susanna's story from different points of view. In the book, the focus is extremely subjective, as one has the impression of immersing themselves in the protagonist's mind and has the opportunity to know and live her experience and history through her own eyes. Instead, watching the film, we have a more objective focus. In fact, even though Susanna's considerations are frequently expressed, one has the opportunity to form a personal opinion about the happenings and the characters who are, some more than others, co protagonists of Susanna's story. I chose Girl Interrupted for this analysis because during my adolescence it was a film that I used to watch often, becoming my favorite movie. Susanna's story really impressed me. In addition, I have always been interested in the psychological genre. Furthermore, the official hospital reports are attached in the book, so I had the chance to read them, and I found out that even Ray Charles was hospitalized in Claymore Hospital and that Susanna's father was Kennedy's main advisor.